everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Lissa Muscatine, co-owner of Politics and Prose, and along with my husband and co-owner Brad Graham and our incredibly wonderful staff at the bookstore, we welcome you to today's event. And we are so honored and so grateful to have so many of you with us. It is our largest P&P Live event ever to date. And we've been doing this since the pandemic started. So thank you all so much for being with us today. And I have to say, no wonder, given the two extraordinary women you will be hearing from in a moment. Today's the actual publication date of Louise Penny's new novel. It's called All the Devils Are Here. It's the 16th in her series of mysteries featuring Chief Inspector Armand Gamache. I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. In this novel, you will find our beloved Gamache in a new location, very far from Three Pines and very far from Quebec, but I will say no more. Now, the release of any new Louise Penny novel is a headline-inducing event, and that's because Louise writes mysteries like no one else on the planet. And here's the proof. Her books are always bestsellers. They have been translated into 29 languages. She's won so many prizes for her writing, 7 Agatha Awards, 1 Dagger Award, and she's been a finalist for an Edgar Award. And already All the Devils Are Here has taken the country by storm, earning rave reviews from the Wall Street Journal, PBS, Parade Magazine, and being named People's Upcoming Book for next week. I just want to say one more thing about Louise Penny that goes beyond her writing, and I think it's important to mention this in this moment of collective crisis that we're living through right now. Louise is a model of public citizenship. She works steadfastly to make the world better through support of battered women, those suffering from Alzheimer's, and also the local hospital where she lives in Canada. If you read her books, you know that there is a well of humanity that comes forth in them, evocations of deep friendship, and a real concern about the world around her. So I think it's important to know that she doesn't just write about these things, she actually walks the walk. In conversation today with Louise is another exemplar of citizenship and public service. Hillary Rodham Clinton has served as our nation's first lady, two-term senator from New York, Secretary of State, the Democratic Party's presidential nominee in 2016, and founder of a progressive grassroots political organizing platform, Onward Together. Secretary Clinton is also a best-selling author, having published, I've lost count, but I think it's closing in on a dozen books. Most recently, wonderful book called The Book of Gutsy Women that everybody should have on their bookshelf. And also a lovely, beautiful children's book that just came out over the summer, Grandma's Gardens. And both of those last two, she co-authored with her daughter, Chelsea. But most important for our purposes tonight, Secretary Clinton is, and I don't know how many of you know this, a lifelong reader and lover of mysteries. And as long as I have known her, which is now almost 30 years, she never, it seems, goes a day without reading fiction, and often it's a mystery. I know that she's already read All the Devils Are Here, just as she has never missed any of Louise's previous novels. We are just so delighted and honored to have Louise Penny and Hillary Clinton with us today. I am sure we'll hear more about how these two women became deep and devoted friends, and perhaps they will also tell us a little bit about what it is about mysteries that so animates both of them. And so, Madam Secretary, Louise, welcome to P&P Live. We are so honored to have you. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. And I am thrilled to be here, but I think I've got to start my video. Yeah. Here I am. Hi, Louise. Louise is in London, and I think we have mastered the technology challenge across the pond. Is that right? Can you hear me? Can we hear you? We can't hear you, Louise. We cannot hear you.
Oh, and that's how you save the world. Did you hear?
Oh, she was there.
I've just forgotten what I said, so it's important.
Oh my God, I'm so happy to see you, and I want to thank Lissa for her hosting of us and her introduction of both of us. And
beautiful. That was really very touching.
It really was. I mean, she said too many really untrue and
oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
We'll take them, I guess, right?
There.
I want to start, number one, by asking you about this latest book because it is different. There are a lot of the same themes. Its very first chapter is so gripping, and it's where you find out about the title. It's a visit to one of my favorite places in Paris, and apparently one of yours. But for all of the people who have tuned in and those who love all of your books, what prompted this particular book? What is similar and what is different, in your own words?
Well, you lived through this. We got together at Thanksgiving, and I was telling you about the book and all. You know, you lived through the machinations of moving the series from its normal home, which is in Quebec, in a little village called Three Pines, where most of the other books were set. But I know one of the dangers and one of the challenges of writing a mystery series, particularly when you essentially have the same cast of characters, the same location, is inadvertently writing the same book, becoming formulaic. And I'm really keenly aware of that. And this is book 16. And you know, I don't have to write. I write because I have to. I write because I love it. I don't write, you know, thankfully for the paycheck. So I need to be interested in what I'm writing. And I need to challenge myself. I need to keep getting better. To write the same book, to become formulaic, is not of any interest. So I realized a few books back that I wanted to take Gamache out of his comfort zone and take me out of my comfort zone. And set the book in Paris, where, and it wasn't arbitrary. His son lives there and has through the whole series. His son-in-law and daughter have now moved there. A new baby's on the way. It seemed absolutely natural that, of course, Gamache, Armand and his wife would go to Paris. So that was the plot reason. My personal reason was that I needed to be challenged. I wanted to try something different and see if I could pull it off.
Well, you've more than pulled it off, as Lissa said in the introduction, and I've actually read some of the reviews in preparation for talking with you today. They are over the top stellar. And people have really embraced the move to Paris. And there is some complexity in the family relationship that is explored. So your leap of faith, getting out of your comfort zone, has certainly worked in the eyes of those reviewers who have already just gushed about the book.
Which is pretty amazing. Honestly, I sort of worry that after 16 books, they're going to turn on you. So, you know that feeling, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I've had a few experiences.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely, and I didn't have to sleep with any of them, though I was.
What a confession, and you've heard it here on the Politics and Prose.
Oh, Hillary Clinton, you drag the worst things out of me.
Now, what I wish you would tell everyone is where this terrific title came from. Because one of the things that I loved your books before I ever had the chance to meet you, and we developed such a wonderful friendship. But I loved the literary references in your book. I loved Ruth's crazy poetry in your book.
That's Margaret Atwood.
Yeah, where did this title come from?
Well, this title came from, it's a line from Shakespeare's The Tempest. When I was in high school, I produced the school play, and it happened to have been, it wasn't my choice, The Tempest, which in my opinion is the one play that should never ever be produced. It is unproducible, certainly for a high school cast. But I got to know the play very well, and I loved a lot of the themes that ran through it. The speeches are beautiful. And one of them is a storm-tossed sea, terrible things are happening. A mariner knows he's going to die or feels he's going to die. And as he's jumping from the ship, the line is, "Hell is empty and all the devils are here." And I thought, oh my God. And I thought, for the city of light, where would you find darkness? And I thought, again, the books, as you know, you and I have talked about this, the books are about many things, least of all, although they're proudly crime novels and murder mysteries, the murder is really the Trojan horse in which all sorts of other elements are brought in and explored. And one of them is duality, that dark and light. You mentioned the garden. The book starts in our favorite, your favorite, my favorite garden in Paris. It's the Musée Rodin. In the garden, there are all statues everywhere, and they're just placed. So you turn a corner, and there's this magnificent statue. You sit down on a concrete bench, and there's the gates of hell. It's horrifying and harrowing and inspiring and beautiful. And then there's the Burghers of Calais, which is really the ligament that holds the book together. And it's that you talked before about the themes and the fact that this book is about perception. It's about that we are the culmination of all of our perceptions, and perception is choice. It's about memory, what we remember. The book is about memory, not just what we remember, but how we remember events. Mm-hmm. And how obviously the same event can be remembered by different people, and how that then impacts the rest of your life.
And that becomes a very poignant part of the story of Gamache's son.
Yes.
Which we will not go into because it's such a central part of the character development and the unfolding of the story. But one of the joys for you must have been having to go to Paris too. I mean, you just had to go to Paris, Louise, go to Paris and, try to figure out where you were going to, have the characters live and stay and eat and walk.
Let me ask you this. You know Paris well. Do you have a favorite neighborhood or?
My favorite is, around Notre Dame, and it, must have been just heartbreaking for you to go. And, on the city island, all of the area in there, because that's where I first went as a very young woman. So I have a lot of memories of being there when I was, like 22 or 23. But what I loved about how the book starts in a garden and ends in a garden. And, you think of the gardens of Paris and they just flood your memories with everything you saw if you've been lucky enough to go to Paris. But here you were in a city that you hadn't actually lived in, you had visited. It's not like where you feel rooted in Quebec and Three Pines. How did you get into the whole feeling of Paris to be able to write about it?
Well, that's a really great question. That was my concern too, is that I didn't know Paris. I know London well. I come here, I have a place here. I every time I get on a plane, it seems to go to either New York or London, lucky me. I didn't know Paris well. I'd been there a couple of times, first time with Michael, my husband. So I have just such warmth, but I hadn't been back since Michael died. And what I knew I had to do was create, again, a sense of community. Now, Paris is overwhelming. It's a huge city. But what I knew, no big surprise, is that it's actually made up of a bunch of neighborhoods, arrondissements. So what I had to do was choose a couple of them, rather than trying to capture all of Paris, which I couldn't possibly do. I would choose a couple of these neighborhoods. And one is the Marais, where Gamache has a home, and where some of the gardens, I wanted these sort of hidden gardens where some of the gardens exist. And then the other is Saint-Germain-des-Prés. So I wanted to create a sense of community and belonging with the bistros and the restaurants and the cafes and the bakeries, that when you're reading the book, you get to know them, and they all exist.
Yeah, no, that's the other thing that I love about reading your book. They always, they always delight me and they make me hungry.
Oh, yes, my hips are like a tribute. They're a homage to the books.
I mean, there's a lot of food in your books.
There is.
And the other thing that I particularly enjoyed was how you lifted up a lot of the other characters. Obviously Gamache remains central to the plot, but his wife, Reine-Marie, his, son, his daughter, his son-in-law, everybody is seen in a slightly different way. And when you, I know you write every day. You're a very disciplined writer. And are you one of those writers who often says, I don't know where the characters are going to take me until they take me there? Or do you have an idea like, I want to make, you know, Reine-Marie be a more lively part of this story?
I had that. No, that's a really good question, because it's a bit of both. My challenge is finding the sweet spot between over planning and not planning enough. If I don't plan enough, then I just get lost and it's a mess. If I over plan, there's no space for, you know, the grace notes, for inspiration to come in. So trying to find that balance. And my first drafts are a real mess. I mean, I know I want to explore this aspect of Reine-Marie. I want to see about Gamache's relationship with his son, but I'm not really sure. When I started the book, I didn't know how it would be resolved. I didn't know what that scene would be. And so it did allow, I knew there would be a scene. I just didn't know what it was. So having some structure, but not too much, is really the key. And I struggle with that with every book.
Yeah. Well, but that's what's so, you know, so fascinating about the creative process. And, you know, you and I have talked a lot about how you labored for so many years to get your first book published, and what a serendipitous event happening in London, as it turned out.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts now, having just obviously completed your 16th book and already it's a bestseller? What would you say to people who are watching, who maybe they've tried to write something, maybe they believe they have a story to write? How would you both encourage them, but also guide them?
I as you know, suffered from 5 years of writer's block. So this almost didn't happen. And what I had to do finally, and some of it was conscious, most of it just was by good luck or fortune or fate. I surrounded myself with very positive, thoughtful, kind, supportive people. You know, there are a lot of people out there who are more than willing to find flaws. And it's easy. It's easy to find flaws. It takes no great courage, no great character or intellect to find a flaw. It's a lot more difficult sometimes to see the flaws, but choose to focus on the positive. So I needed people like that around me. And creative people, women, these were women, a group of women named, we call ourselves Les Girls. And we'd get together once a month and talk about their creative process. And I still hadn't started writing. The last thing was, I realized that the reason I was stuck, and the reason maybe some of these other people are stuck, is that I was trying to write for other people, for the approval of my mother, for the approval of my former colleagues, my teachers who all thought I was an idiot, but, you know, all of everybody but myself. And that's a tyranny, and it's a tyranny that's followed me most of my life. And I really had to sit myself down and say, you know what, you're 40, you're going to die not having done the one thing you were meant to do because you're too afraid. You're afraid. And what are you afraid of? The judgment of strangers, the judgment of even your family, the judgment of others is paralyzing you. So I had that was an aha moment where I just thought, just write a book for yourself. Write a book I would read. And I know myself, I'm no different than anyone else. If I want to read it, there's a pretty good chance other people will too. And if not, that's too bad. That's, you know, at least I tried. The contract I made with my 8-year-old self when I knew I wanted to be a writer wasn't that the book be published or even be any good, but just that it be finished. And if it wasn't published, you know, I would be disappointed, but I would have no regrets. And that at the end of my days is what I want, is no regrets. So write. I have, as you know, this a poster, not in front of me here, but at home in Quebec, with the final words of Seamus Heaney. And he said on his deathbed, "Noli temere, be not afraid," because I am afraid every day. But I am damned if I'm going to let that fear steal my dreams. So every day I look at that poster, it's right in front of me, and I say, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it.
And of course, I think that's such profound advice for everyone, not just people who want to be writers.
Well, if I dare, I say
your dream is, right? Whatever your dream is, whatever your passion is, whatever your fear is, to do everything you can to push through it, overcome it, get on whatever channel or, level you're supposed to be on to do what you're meant to do.
Right, exactly. And you are such a great example of that. You are an incredible example and inspiration for so many people, including myself. So I should have a picture of you right beside Noli to me.
Well, no, I know Lissa has been collecting lots and lots of questions. And
before we do that, Hillary, I hate to do this, but I think I'd like to tell people, and Lissa mentioned it before about how you and I became friends. Do you mind if I tell people?
No, go right ahead.
That? Well, Hillary tracked me down and begged me to be her friend. What happened was just before the 2016 election, your best friend Betsy gave an interview where she was asked, what are some of the things you and Hillary share? And among the things she said was, we love reading, and we love reading many of the same books. And didn't the interviewer ask, well, what are you reading now? And by some twist of fate, trick of fate, you happen to be reading one of mine. So she said, a Louise Penny. My marvelous publicist, who you've met, Sarah Melnick, saw that. She got in touch with Betsy. I was going to Chicago. She lived there. I was going for the launch event. We met, became fast friends. And then I went on my way. She went on hers. 2 weeks after the tour was over, Michael died. And a week later, I got in the mail a letter from you. You and I had never met. You'd never met Michael. You're in the middle of the political battle of the century of your life. And you take time to write a condolence letter to a Canadian who can't even vote, a woman you've never met, about a man you've never met. And it wasn't just, dear occupant, sorry for your loss. It had specifics about Michael's life, that you had taken the time to research him. And it was an act of selflessness, of generosity, of kindness I will never forget. And that does inspire me every day to try to be as kind to others as you have been to me. And that, if I didn't love you before, and I did, I fell in love with you that moment when I opened that letter. It was a beautiful thing. And then we finally met, and it just got better from there.
Well, of course, you had the great joy of meeting Betsy, who had been my best friend since 6th grade, and who had just the most extraordinary gift for friendship. And not just for making friends herself, but then connecting all of her friends together. And so immediately after you met her at your book event outside of Chicago, I got pictures of you and her husband, Tom, and I got a full report about what it was like meeting you. And of course, she and I were really relieved because we loved your books, and we thought, boy, what a downer it would be if you turned out to be an ogre. Luckily, you didn't. And then after the great catastrophe of 2016, you and Betsy had made a plan to meet in New York, where you were, I guess, renovating an apartment you had bought. And so I said, come see us. And so we just had the most wonderful time, and it went from there. And I think a lot of what keeps me going are those friendships. And although Betsy passed away last July, her gift of friendship keeps on giving, because she connected us, and she connected so many other people to me and to others in a way that is so sustaining. And that's something I will be grateful for the rest of my days.
I have a picture here of, which is one of my prized possessions, of you and Betsy and me, which I'm tempted to go and get, but that would mean I'd have to leave the screen all to you, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah, don't do that. The only thing I will say before we ask Lissa to come in is I bet at least 60%, if not more, of the people watching you are wondering, what are those creatures over your shoulder? Because they look like giant snakes, but I have been told reliably by you that they are ostriches.
They are
the weirdest looking ostriches, and you sit there and watch them when you're in London.
And they watch me, and they're watching you. Yeah,
yeah, that's true. They're watching us. So for anybody who is wondering, that's what they are. They're ostriches.
They're not snakes. It's not some Medusa's head.
if they show up in a future Gamache, we're going to know where they came from, okay?
We'll know exactly.
Actually, the last thing I will say before turning it over to Lissa with her questions from the audience is my grandfather, among the many failed business enterprises that he attempted, in addition to working in the Scranton lace mills in Scranton, Pennsylvania his entire life, was an ostrich farm. Don't get me started because I don't know why, but I do remember my father telling me how mean ostriches were because he and his brothers had to go out and feed the ostriches on the soon-to-fail ostrich farm. So anyway, so Lissa, we don't want to take any more time away from all of your viewers. So I'm sure Louise would be ready for some more questions from them.
Both of us, yes.
No, thank you. You should take all the time you want, by the way. But first of all, I just want to say, if either of you is ever having a really bad day, you should just read this chat board that we have going with hundreds and hundreds of comments. I think we have heard from people in all of the 50 states, Canada, around the world. And if you could just read them, you will never feel that you are not deeply, deeply loved. So just want to put that out there since I can't read all of them. So here's one question for Louise that I bet a lot of people are wondering. And it is from Anika. And she says, Louise, while writing this book, did you miss all our other Three Pines friends?
I did. And again, Hillary you were so careful about the spoiler thing. So thank you for that. And this isn't a spoiler, but they do come in every now and then. They don't come to Paris, but there are connections there. So there is an awareness that there is a community back home. But yes, I did. Now I'm writing the next one now. And that is one of the great joys of being away, as we all know. When you're away from home and then you return home, it's like coming back and seeing it fresh and being so happy to be back there.
Okay, I'm going to paraphrase this next question because several people have asked similar iterations of it. And they want to know what are each of your favorite and least favorite of these Gamache books. But why don't we just go with the favorites?
All right.
So, Madam Secretary, your favorites and your favorite characters. And Louise, I don't know if you have a favorite or if you're the author, you want to admit that you have a favorite.
Well, you know what I feel about inhabiting Louise's books as though that each book is like a chapter in a much larger story. I fell in love with Still Life, the very first book, because I fell in love with the characters. And that just continued. And since she has produced a book sort of year by year, I felt like I was living with all of these characters. Some of them would leave, one in particular gets, killed off. So you feel like it's not a book, it's a intertwined set of life stories. And that's why I find them so appealing, because I can pick it up and, what happened to Gamache or Jean-Guy or whoever in the prior book, the storyline continues, and the scars, both the physical, the mental and emotional scars, are part of the ongoing story. So I just love the story of what Louise has created. And having been to Three Pines, as I have, I actually fell in love with the location. And I learned so much. I had no idea that loyalists crossed the border from, Vermont to the other side into Canada to set up their establishments and their settlements. So, I mean, it's just been a terrific, long love affair with these characters.
What a wonderful thing to say. Thank you. I remember giving a talk in, I think it was somewhere in the southern states. It might have been Houston, actually, talking about the loyalists. And a woman at the back raised her hand. She said, you do know that we don't call them loyalists. This was in the War of Independence, where the people who were loyal to the British Crown came across. She said, no, I think they're called something else here. That's a beautiful thing to say, because I actually think of that too, that because there's a memory that runs through them. It's not, they are meant to be self-standing. Though the plot line doesn't always end with the book, though generally there is a resolution. But the intuitive line, the character development continues and grows. I think that was one of the reasons Agatha Christie famously said that she grew tired of Poirot. I think that might be one of the reasons, because he never evolved. I went back to the first one.
That is so, because that is really, that makes the point that I was trying to make. I mean, if you have somebody like Agatha Christie, who wrote so many books, but they each stand on their own, you could say, well, that one's my favorite, or I wasn't keen on that plot, or whatever, because there is no evolution. He just, Poirot just pops up in his, I always think of him dressed, like in a black tie looking like a penguin, just sort of the personality. And yet your characters are so real and so rooted. And you feel like you're just dropping in on them and picking up the conversation where it ended, the book before.
Let me ask you a quick question and then maybe get back. But I never did read Nancy Drew, for which you berate me constantly.
Yes, true.
Did Nancy Drew, did those books evolve? Did she grow?
Yeah, she did. I mean, she's the early books. I have to say there's a big schism between the early books about Nancy Drew in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and then sometime in the mid 60s, they tried to, quote, modernize her, and also, from my perspective, kind of contain her or make her more, quote, ladylike. So there were a lot of the same characters. It wasn't as developed, obviously, as your cast of characters, but, her friends and the boy that probably was her boyfriend and her father and their housekeeper. So there were people who were a continuing presence in book after book. Mm-hmm. And it was her, and she never really got that much older than being 16, but she did have adventures and go places that were quite intriguing to young women of my age. And in my Book of Gutsy Women with Chelsea, we write about all of these women, from Sandra Day O'Connor to Laura Bush to Gayle King, you name it, who were influenced by Nancy Drew. And Chelsea's always saying that she's so glad that my mother saved my copies of Nancy Drew, because I might get a copy for Christmas or my birthday, because those were the original copies before they tried to, I guess, tame Nancy Drew a little bit.
Oh, yes. I'm sad that I never got to read them.
Well, they're still there. You can borrow my old copies if you want.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions about poetry in your books, Louise. So I'll just read one that is pretty reflective of many of them. And it's, could Louise tell us about the poetry she includes in her book? She spoke a little bit about that earlier, but maybe you could elaborate. And then the second part of the question is some of that her own original poetry, especially the quotes from Ruth?
I wish it was. I am the worst poet ever. We talked about a 16-year-old. I always feel like a tormented 16-year-old when I try to write poetry. So no, it's not mine. It belongs to two people. One is a woman who essentially her book was self-published, but a wonderful book. I think there were only about 50 copies ever made, and I ended up with one of them. And that's some of Ruth's poetry. Who Hurt You Once So Far Beyond Repair is from that. But the other poet I use all the time is Margaret Atwood.
Mhm.
And I put her from a book called Morning in the Burned House. It's a cheery little book. You know, you wonder why is poetry not more popular? Well, maybe because you call it Morning in the Burned House. But inside, spectacular, beautiful, beautiful works, transcendent works. And I use it obviously with permission, because you don't, as a Canadian, you do not want to piss off Margaret Atwood.
Or as anyone.
I know anyone, yes. Right. So that's, I wanted Ruth, most of the poetry is Ruth's, of course. Ruth is an older, embittered, quite angry woman, but I didn't want her to be one note. So, and we all have saving graces, and her saving grace is a certain insight that comes out in her poetry.
Mhm.
And so you get to see that this is a complex human being who's happened to have been born inside out. Her worst thoughts are on the inside. She keeps the kindness and the goodness well hidden, but it pops out in the poetry.
So related question, and this, you've sort of answered it, Louise, but Madam Secretary, this person wanted to know for both of you, what is some of your favorite, or who are some of your favorite poets? And I know you also are a big fan of poetry.
Oh, that's so interesting. You know, I think it was right before, or maybe right at the beginning of our conversation, Louise mentioned Seamus Heaney and the quote that she has on her wall, which were his last words written to his wife as he lay dying. And I you know, came across him years ago and was lucky enough to get to meet him. And I have found lots of inspiration, and of course, hope and history rhyme is one of the great lines that I know of in modern poetry. So I mean, there's a long line of them, but he's somebody that I'd like to lift up right now.
And if I'm not mistaken, you have had a pet canine named after him. Is that right?
We did. Our late Labrador, Seamus, who lived to 13, but is no longer with us.
Well, a testament to your love of Seamus Heaney, I guess. Okay, so here's one for Louise. Can Louise tell us about lemon meringue pie? There's a couple references in your books, and you talked a little bit about the sumptuous meals in some of these books. So what about the lemon meringue pie, Louise?
This is one of the things when Hillary asked, do you plan, how deeply do you plan? I did not plan the duck, which we may get into, but neither did I plan the lemon meringue pie. The lemon meringue pie is, honestly, it's a reference to the divine. It sounds silly, but in one of the books, Gamache is off at a fishing village, and there's this fisherman there who's eating lemon meringue pie, and he scribbles something on the wall and then leaves. And it's a prayer that he scribbled on the wall. And then from then on, lemon meringue pie sort of shows up every now and then as a kind of a leitmotif. I wanted something banal. I wanted something every day to denote the divine.
Well, so Louise, you raised the duck. You have to now tell the duck story. I think you decided to use a duck because it rhymed with your favorite profanity, but there might be a deeper reason why Ruth has a pet duck.
There was a question about it too, so excellent that you raised that.
In fact, I don't know if you can see it, maybe not. Can you see the book behind me? And there's the little duck there, which has the word that rhymes with duck written on it 3 times, because that's what Rosa says. No, Rosa was not planned. Rosa came in book 3 in the spring, a book set at Easter. And Rosa is a bit of an allegory. Rosa came about because Ruth, the embittered poet, touches these duck eggs in the pond and then realizes that she's then contaminated them, that the mother will not nurture them, will not sit on them, will not hatch them. So she takes there are 2 of them, back home, and everyone thinks, well, she's going to make an omelet out of these eggs. As it turns out, unbeknownst to anyone, she nurtures them, and she makes a little nest, and she puts them in the oven, and just at the right temperature, and she worries over them and watches them. And then as they begin to crack out of the shell, one of them makes it just fine, and the other is really struggling and can't quite get out, can't make it out. And so Ruth helps the duck and cracks the thing open. And unbeknownst to her, what she ends up doing, what that does is it handicaps the duck. The duck needs the struggle to survive, to get strong wings, to get strong lungs. It needs to fight its way out. And by helping it, she's essentially condemned it to death. And that's, again, an allegory for so many of us, that, the road to hell. And so Rosa is the one that survives, and Rosa bonds with Ruth, and Ruth bonds with Rosa. And it's so important for me in the books to get across subtly, I hope, the message that we get to define family. That, a family can be an elderly woman and a duck. It can be two men, it can be two women, it can be a husband and wife, it can be friends, the family of the heart. We get to decide. And so from anyone outside, Rosa, who hasn't read the books, can seem laughable. But if you read the books, you see that this is a family, and this is part of what humanizes Ruth.
This may be a hard question to answer, actually, as simple as it seems, but one person asked Louise, when you read your completed novel, do you find yourself critiquing it? Do you ever feel disbelief that you wrote it?
Once the book is published, I do not read it again, because exactly what, it's the die is cast. I can't change it. And I know that I will probably be hypercritical. When I read over my first drafts and I'm doing the rewrite, the second draft, I'm often shocked at how bad it is. Like someone bad who clearly can't write snuck in here and wrote this first draft. But eventually it comes around. But yeah, I think there's a sense for most of us that there is, angels on our shoulders sometimes that are helping us along and making us. There's a line that you might have heard, Hillary, from one of our prime ministers, Lester B. Pearson, back in the 60s. He had quite a character for a wife, and his wife quite famously said that behind every successful man there stands a surprised woman. And I think, they're behind me, there's a whole parade of surprised men and women go, how did she do that? And often it's me. How did I do that? It's a wonderment. It's a wonderment, and it's a wonderful thing to wake up every morning just amazed.
Here's another question that's really, it is addressed to both of you, which is, are there any topics that you find too challenging or too difficult to really write about?
Hillary,
Well, I don't have the experience that Louise does with, her long and successful career. And I've written what I consider to be nonfiction. I suppose some people might think all or part of it is fiction. I don't know. I mean, I've written about a lot of personal things. I've written about a lot of big global issues. I haven't always told everything that I know or everything that occurred, because I couldn't figure out a way to do it without breaching a confidence or without embarrassing someone that I didn't want to embarrass. So that's really, I mean, everything is, for me, kind of, on the table that I try to write about. I don't feel like I'm in any way constrained, other than these internal, concerns that I have about whether or not something should be pushed into the public domain at a particular time.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Louise, what about you?
It's a difficult one. I don't think a writer should be constrained. I think that's part of our job, is to challenge ourselves and challenge society. And sometimes that's unpleasant. Sometimes we get it wrong. I mean, there's huge debates right now about the appropriation of other cultures. And I think that's a really, really painful and difficult and challenging debate. And I don't know how I feel about that, which makes it all the more interesting. Mm-hmm. I honestly don't know whether it would be wrong for me to write from the perspective of an Aboriginal woman. It may be. I don't know. And it worries me. It worries me to put those boundaries, all this self-censorship mm-hmm. is worrisome. At the same time, I clearly understand that then I'm taking, away someone else's voice.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads to another question, which is, do you identify with your characters or any of your characters, or are they figments?
No, I identify with all of them. But here I am, a woman, Anglo woman, writing about a Francophone man. He's mm-hmm. clearly, I don't know how that happens. Yeah. Except that there is that core. I think what I'm writing about, I hope, is what we all have in common, whether you're a man or a woman, or whether you live in South America or Asia or Canada. There are commonalities about our human experience. There's more that binds us together than separates us. And so that's, I think, what I try to write about. But yeah, I certainly, there are elements good and bad. I mean, the reason I can write Ruth is I understand what it's like to be embittered. The reason I can write some of the other characters, I know what despair is like. That's, Hillary and I talk about, you don't get to be a certain age with gray in your hair without knowing what a lot of this feels like.
Mm-hmm. Can I'm going to take the host prerogative for a second and ask a question myself that I've been wondering about. And I just want to preface it with a story, which is that I don't know how many years ago this was, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. And I was at the bookstore one afternoon and a car pulls up and, right in front, and who jumps out but Bill Clinton. And he runs in the store and he says, it's our anniversary today and I need to find the latest mystery. He was looking for a very particular mystery that had just come out. There, I need to find it for Hillary because I got to give it to her for a present. It's our anniversary. So, we're rushing around, we're finding it. And I'm telling the story because it was so cute, first of all, but also he was so determined because he knows how much you love mystery. So this is just evidence of how much she loves mysteries. But I wanted to ask you, Madam Secretary, what, in your view, and you both have touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can, go a little bit further. What makes a great mystery for you? Because there are a lot of different, there are mysteries that are, the noir Scandinavian with, graphic violence and all sorts of other stuff. And then there are these, intellectual mysteries. And then there are Louise's, which have such a evocation, as I said earlier, of humanity and friendship, but lots of, other complicated stuff. But what is it? What is the essence of a good mystery for you as a reader?
Well, for me personally, it is the kind of mysteries that Louise writes. I am, I like to read or dip into reading, like you say, the noir, like the Scandinavians, or, reading, some of the, really intense, bloody mysteries, but they're not my preference. I mean, if it's a well-written book, I will read it after my husband reads it, because he'll read everything that has a mystery and a dead body in it. And so I am much more drawn to, the stories that are rich enough that the solving of the mystery is, of course, central to the plot, but the relationships that exist among the characters and the personal struggles in in the mind of a Gamache, for example, are much more in line with what I'm interested in reading about. So I like police procedurals. I like, a good mystery, whether it's, the Agatha Christie or, the James Patterson. I read, obviously, Catholically and as broadly as I can. But the ones that I truly love are the ones like Louise, which is why, I fell in love with her books before I ever had a chance to meet her and become friends with her.
And I expect that for somebody like you, mysteries are, as for most of us, and I just want to say, I just started reading a lot of mysteries not that long ago, partly to escape the reality of the world around us. But is that what it is also? It's just such an incredible diversion. It's entertainment.
Yeah, it is. And also, you know, usually the bad guy gets it in the end.
Yeah.
And that's not always the experience, or at least my experience in the real world. So I like seeing the bad guy get his comeuppance, whatever it might be.
And Louise, I sort of, to flip the question, are there elements that are essential? I mean, you've talked about some of them, but do you have a kind of mental checklist of the things that you have to have in a novel for you to consider it a successful mystery?
No, not at all. I don't. I try to actually stay away from the sort of checklist things. I think instinctively, though, I have a sense of, yeah, this is working or that isn't, or you know, when I first started, they said, well, you have to have the body on the first page. And they had all these rules about crime writing, and it's a big tent. Anyone, you know, that works for some. Other people, as Hillary said so well, you know, there's the procedurals, there's the noir, there's the cozies, and God bless anybody who writes a book. It's hard enough. When I was first trying to get Still Life, my first book, published, and nobody wanted it, and most of them never even read it, but the publishers. But I finally got a small Quebec publisher to read it. He didn't want it either. But he said, as I was getting on the elevator, it was closing, and just as it was closing, he leaned forward and he said, "What's the book about?" And I thought, well, harumph, it's about murder, of course. And then I realized, you know, murder is an act, it's not a theme. The book cannot be about murder, it has to be about something else. And I think that's what's important to me, is that every book be about more than murder.
You know, President Clinton, as you just said, was a great mystery lover, and he has written a book with James Patterson. So we have a question here that does not refer to that, but does ask whether the two of you might ever think about writing a book together. So just putting it out there. Louise, somebody was wondering what your writing process is like. Do you have a process? Do you have a routine? This seems like there are some aspiring writers who want to know how you go about writing your books.
I do. I think that was also one of my problems when I was suffering from writer's block, is that I thought, well, I'll just wait for inspiration to hit. Not realizing you really have to kind of go out and find inspiration. So yeah, I am extremely disciplined. Part of that comes from having been a journalist. So I was very well trained about that. I had to show up at a certain time. You have to do your research. You have to know when to stop researching. And how to tell a story. So I learned how to be very disciplined. So I get up, I'm a morning person, so I get up early, I make a coffee, I answer some initial emails, and then set that aside and I start writing. And I set a word count because I'm also very goal-oriented. It helps to know yourself, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. If anyone tells you this is how to do it, you know, it may be for you, but there are any number of ways of writing a book and being happy about doing it. Mine is to set a word count. I'm at that stage now with the books where that's particularly helpful at first, but after I reach a certain point in the writing, I don't need to do that. But that's essentially my day, is I write until I hit that word count. And sometimes I know that it's not very good. You know, some days are just going to be like that, and I try to fix it the next day. What I do is when I first start, I go back over what I'd written the day before, and that gets me back into the world. And I get to use my editing hat, which is the different side of the brain. And then when it comes to the new writing, I'm up to speed.
We have time for a few more questions. And I just can't resist this one. What role does literature have in politics? And I expect you both have something to say about that.
Listen, I could not understand your question. I'm sorry.
Sorry, here it is again. What role does literature have in politics?
Oh, Hillary?
Well, I can tell you that, you know, literature in general is a mirror of who we are, and there's no issue that I think is more alive in literature than the politics of the time, whether or not it's an explicitly political book. You know, I've read so many books that are not about politics at all, but they're about how people are feeling. They're about what's happening in society. They're about, you know, dangers or threats on the horizon. They are immersed in whatever the small p politics are of the time and place. And then there are books that are, you know, much more explicitly political, and sometimes reflective of the time, but sometimes through the mind and eye of the writer foreseeing something. So Philip Roth, for example, foresaw some of the, you know, issues that we're dealing with right now in terms of the rise of authoritarianism and the, you know, the conflict between people who want to, you know, be led by a, quote, strong leader, whether or not that makes any rational sense. So I think that politics is part of any literature. You know, the title of this wonderful book comes from Shakespeare, and everybody knows Shakespeare was very much immersed in the history and the politics of his time. And I think, you know, that's true for any writer whose name we could recall right now.
Louise, I mean, is it fair to say that fiction can get to a deeper truth than nonfiction?
I completely agree with what Hillary just said. I think there's a problem when political leaders only read political biographies or autobiographies or books about politics, because generally you're looking then at the world up here. And intellectually, you're not getting into people's hearts. You're not getting into the kitchens. You're not getting onto the streets. And that's where literature comes in. Literature, as Hillary said, you know, you get insight into real people's lives on the street level, the voters, the human beings who the politicians are going to be making life decisions about. And you learn about that by reading the aspirations, the failures, the heartbreaks, the lives of regular human beings you read about in literature.
Maybe we could start with a leader who reads anything.
Right.
that would be, you know, that in my view would be a gigantic step forward. But so we have time for only one more question. This has gone by so quickly, but I'd like to ask this question, and a lot of people have asked variations on this question, and I think it's a great question to end on. It's a deep question, and it's sort of for the moment. And it is, both of you demonstrate an obvious and palpable sense of joy and hope and perseverance. What or whom do you draw on to maintain your largely positive outlooks during difficult times such as now?
Why don't I take that first? Because I think what Hillary has to say might be a great way to end this. I'm a recovering alcoholic, 25 years sober now. So I hit bottom when I wanted to kill myself, which is pretty much about the bottom as anyone can get. Fortunately, I did not. So I'm a big fan of asking for help. But in church basements and in grungy little rooms, I learned that anyone can save anyone else, not to judge others, and how beautiful life is, and that life is choice. And I get to choose what I focus on. And every day I wake up and I'm grateful, which isn't to say my day is perfect or my life is perfect. It isn't. But, you know, I have a higher power in my life. I have faith. I have belief. I have friends. I have a roof over my shoulder. That wouldn't be so good. Over my head. So that's what I draw on.
Well, I think that's actually the perfect way to end, Lissa, because, you know, you do have a choice. Everybody has a choice every single day, and then really every hour of every day. You can choose to be overwhelmed by everything that's going on around us. And I think we all know that it could be quite difficult to withstand all of the feelings that many of us have at what's going on in our country and our world. Or you can say, yeah, and I'm going to try to do something about that. That's my choice. Maybe my choice is to vote. Maybe my choice is to get other people to vote. Maybe my choice is to turn it off and go read All the Devils Are Here, because we have a lot of devils who are here right now. And maybe there's something I can, learn from and take comfort from, but also resolve from in seeing how Louise deals with the very real question of evil, the darkness and the light. And not to put too partisan angle on this, one of the best parts of the Democratic convention was certainly Joe Biden's speech. And what I particularly liked about it is how he, tried to describe the moment we are in as a choice between the dark and the light. I mean, that goes back to the very beginning of recorded history. And individuals have that choice, leaders have that choice. In a democracy, we should always be looking to choose light, choosing, hope over fear, choosing unity over disunity. So I think that it's not to say we don't get down. It's not to say we don't feel, discouraged or depressed or upset, because we do. And, Louise and I can vent about, those feelings. But at the end of that, you have a choice. And I think what I love about Gamache and the way that Louise has brought him and all of his characters around him alive is they face really difficult choices all the time. They face choices about getting out of addiction. As Louise just reminded us, that was a choice she had to make, and she makes every day. They face choices about, relationships, about whether to listen to evil and venal superiors and employers, whether to befriend those who are maybe different. And so the choices are always there. And I think to, try to bring all this together with what Louise has given us in this latest installment of the life and times and challenges of Gamache, is to see those choices through her writing, and to figure out how we then can be strengthened by and encouraged by our ability to make better choices for ourselves. And for our country, for our country. So this may be the last time I do something for Politics and Prose before the election, but, for goodness sakes, please get out there.
Hillary, say it.
Choose the light.
No question about that. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you for those answers, which are so deeply touching and inspiring from both of you. And so your willingness to share, really difficult thoughts about how we proceed right now, because it is, I think we're having a national public health, mental health crisis at the moment that we're all trying to figure our way out of. I want to thank the audience. We had over 2,100 people watching. I think it's a testament to both of you. Thank you for helping bring this group together. Obviously, people are so excited about Louise's book. Here it is. But I just want to say thank you both. I think what you've both just talked about and what the books represent and your love of literature, it really is about the triumph of the human spirit in the darkest of situations, be they personal, be they collective and global. And you give us all hope, you give us all inspiration, that you can be so animated and upbeat and positive in this moment, I think is encouraging to so many people. And there were a lot of questions about that. So thank you both. We are so grateful to have had you, and be safe and be well. And all of you out there, be well and be well read. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Hillary. Thanks.
Bye,
everyone.
Louise.
Bye.
Enjoy London.
Thank you. Love to Bill and Chelsea and the rest.
Okay.
Bye.